Every second, your nervous system processes 11 million bits of raw data. Conscious experience is limited to a single, fragile thread of 50 bits. This radical, lossy compression is a biological necessity. The brain discards the vast majority of environmental signal so we can navigate a room without being paralyzed by the sheer volume of information. When a person hits a crisis point, institutions respond with more information: rigid new rules, complex intake forms, and distant cognitive milestones. Attempting to pour complex instructions into an overwhelmed system ignores the physical limits of human bandwidth. Information is rarely the bottleneck. The capacity to process it is. During a crisis, that 50-bit conscious channel is not just overwhelmed, it is almost entirely consumed by hypervigilant threat signals. The nervous system adaptively reroutes metabolic resources away from the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logic and planning, to prioritize immediate survival. This bar chart shows the physiological cost of crisis. The threat signal expands, drowning out available processing power. Forcing complex institutional demands into a system with no bandwidth left forces a crash. The institution then labels this failure as a lack of willpower. This misdiagnosis treats a biological noise floor problem as a character flaw. Compliance becomes physically impossible when the hardware is entirely dedicated to survival. Addressing this failure requires us to look at what neuroscience says about identity. The concept of a fixed central self making independent decisions is an illusion generated by the brain. Identity is a lossy reconstruction, a temporary artifact that is constantly reconstructed from redundant patterns to summarize a chaotic reality. Traditional therapy often treats this shifting pattern as if it were a solid machine containing broken parts that can be isolated and repaired. Because the self is reconstructed fresh in every moment, trying to fix it is like trying to repair a digital video glitch by painting directly onto the monitor. You are altering a downstream artifact while the underlying signal continues to generate the same error. If the self is merely a summary of variance, the goal of curing an individual misses the source of the problem. Real change requires shifting the conditions that the brain is summarizing. This raises a difficult question. If the self is just a shifting pattern of data, why is our pain so persistent? Why do we still experience such profound, directional longing? The novelist Marilynne Robinson frames the human experience of time as a form of inconsolable mourning. This foundational longing operates as a directionality, a precognitive compass pointing the individual toward reconciliation and connection. We are wired for a cycle of exile and return, reaching toward a sense of home and safety that feels perpetually out of reach. Intellectual understanding cannot dissolve this current. Directionality is the water we are swimming in, existing prior to our cognitive architecture. Trauma functions as a distortion of the attentional landscape. It creates so much noise that the foundational compass can no longer find a clear path toward the connection it seeks. Honoring that directionality requires shifting the unit of analysis for human agency. We must discard the idea that agency is a stored resource of willpower that a person either possesses or lacks. Agency is an emergent property. It emerges from the interaction between an individual and a supporting structure, like a current flowing between two poles. A person paralyzed by crisis is often trapped in a structural configuration that makes agency impossible to express. Healing requires the construction of a holding environment. This environment functions by aggressively lowering the ambient threat noise, allowing the nervous system to finally exit survival mode. When the noise floor drops, people experience a profound shift. They don't learn new information about their desires. They recognize their pre-existing directionality. Freed from institutional static, the inherent compass is finally able to guide the nervous system. We exist as exiles whose inherent compass needs a quiet enough space to guide us home. The goal is to build a geometry that stops working against that return.